Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Pod Theory. I'm your host, Jason Cercone, and today we're answering the question, what are the best ways to monetize your podcast? Finding a way to generate revenue from your podcast is one of the big motivators for podcast creators. However, it's important to understand that podcasting is not a get-rich-quick scheme. I covered this in more detail on episode 68 of Pod Theory, and I welcome you to jump back in the archives and check that episode out. But it's important to crush the thought that millions of dollars are going to fall in your lap just because you launch a podcast. Like so many digital initiatives, some people think this is actually possible. But you and me both know that this doesn't happen. And it certainly doesn't happen quick. But when it doesn't happen quick, these people who think it is possible for $1 million to just fall in their lap because they launch a podcast, they move on to something else. And then they try the same thing. And they get the same result. It's a vicious, vicious cycle. That said, there are definitely ways to generate revenue with your podcast. Now, there are 3 important points to keep in mind as you add monetization strategies to your efforts. 1, focus on delivering value every episode you publish. This will make monetization easier as you grow. Number 2, be patient and deliberate with your strategies. Don't get discouraged if an initiative doesn't pay off right away. And number 3, put emphasis on building your audience. The more listeners you have, the more opportunities you'll have to monetize your show. So what are the best ways to monetize your podcast? There are a lot of routes you can take. Let's take some time to review a few of those avenues right now. One of the easiest ways to get started at the very beginning is to establish some affiliate relationships. This is when a brand offers a commission for any referrals you send their way that end up making a purchase. For example, I'm an affiliate of Buzzsprout, and anytime someone signs up for their service using the link in my show notes, I get an affiliate commission and they receive a $20 Amazon gift card. Everybody wins. Buzzsprout also has a few other affiliate opportunities built right into their service, making it very easy to get started when you're launching a show and want to put some monetization strategies to work at the very onset of your show. But in addition to that, there are always brands out there willing to pay a commission for you sending business their way. So look for those and make them part of your efforts. Another strategy is to ask your audience for donations. Now, I've never personally done this myself, but if you want to explore this potential path to revenue, you could supply your PayPal or Venmo info or set up a GoFundMe page. A very popular way to monetize your podcast is to set up a Patreon account and offer exclusive content to your audience. You can tier your content on various membership levels and give your audience additional material to consume. In order to gain access to said content, your listener will need to pay a small fee for it. If you provide solid value with your free content, you'll make that decision much easier for your listener. Of course, the most common and popular way to monetize your podcast is to sell advertising packages to other brands. In order to do this, you'll need to have download numbers that justify a company investing in ad space on your show. If they're not going to reach a significant audience with their message, they won't see a return. Also, it's important to reserve your ad space for brands that are relevant to your audience. If you have a show that offers financial advice, running an ad for sporting goods most likely isn't going to resonate. Listeners will tune out or fast forward the ad altogether, your advertiser will not be happy with the results, and they won't come back to advertise again. Selling advertising spots on your show is where the patience I mentioned before comes into play. Make sure your audience is large enough to incorporate this strategy into your practices. You can also offer your products and services to guests who appear on your show. I don't recommend hard selling them, especially when they've agreed to take time out of their schedule to appear on your show and help you create something great for your audience. But through the relationship building experience your podcast delivers, you may find collaboration opportunities or they may be in need of what you offer. Be sure to maximize this opportunity if it presents itself. A more indirect way to monetize your podcast is to create and sell merchandise. Not only is this a great monetization tool, it's a great marketing tool. So, 2 birds, 1 stone. T-shirts, hats, keychains, stickers, hoodies, it's all fair game and a spectacular way to amplify the awareness of your podcast, plus generate additional revenue from your efforts. Now, if your goal is to build a brand with your podcast, Producing valuable content that engages the audience and solves their problems is the best monetization strategy you can utilize. If you do your job correctly, your listeners will become customers. Plus, they'll become brand advocates. That type of engagement is priceless and can lead to many long-term gains for your brand. There are some other options you can explore that I'm not going to cover today, but I came across a very informative article on some podcast monetization strategies from our friends at Castos. I'll include a link to that information in the show notes so you can dig a little bit deeper. Whatever strategy or strategies you plan to implement, be sure to plan accordingly for how you want to execute your plan. And move forward with patience. If your efforts don't pan out immediately, make adjustments where necessary. But don't give up on the approach altogether. Monetization will happen if you provide value, so always keep that as your primary focus. And that's going to conclude today's episode of Pod Theory. But before I go, it's time once again for Deck Pandemonium. Our friends at Poddex are official sponsors of Pod Theory, and there's no doubt Poddex is what's causing all this. Poddex will add life to your show, spark crazy good conversations with your co-hosts and guests, and make life easier when it comes to hosting your show and creating engaging, kick-ass content. As a listener of Pod Theory, you can save 10% off any order of physical Poddex products when you shop at poddex.com today. Use promo code PODTHEORY at checkout to save. So Deck Pandemonium is me putting myself on the spot by randomly selecting one card from one of my 5 pod decks and talking about it and answering whatever is on the card right here on the show. Now, I shuffled my interview deck before I started recording today's episode, and I haven't looked at the top card yet, so I'm going to pull it now, I'm going to read it aloud, and I'm going to provide an answer on the spot. Here we go. Today's card reads, if you could ask one person one question and they had to answer truthfully, who and what would you ask? Damn, that's pretty good. All right, you know what? I'm going to use this card and I'm going to use this opportunity to do some good for the United States of America and all of its citizens. One of the biggest mysteries in all of our lifetimes, as far back as our country goes, is who shot JFK. So I would ask the head of the FBI, who shot JFK? And then I would go on a speaking tour all over the place to let every one of you know. So the mystery of who shot John F. Kennedy in November of 1963 would finally be answered. And here is a super outdated plug, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway because it's easily in my top 10 of movies. Watch Oliver Stone's JFK, starring Kevin Costner. Great movie. I think it was 1990 when that movie came out, so absolutely dating myself with that reference, but it's such a good movie. So if you haven't seen that, take some time to watch it. So that's today's round of Deck Pandemonium. These types of questions and many more can be featured on your podcast if you invest in Poddex today. Visit www.poddex.com. That's PODDECKS.com and check out all of the great products they have available. Use promo code PODTHEORY at checkout and you'll save 10% off your purchase. That's going to do it for today's episode of Pod Theory. Good talk. I'll see you back here tomorrow. This has been Jason Cercone on Pod Theory.